I had worked the front desk at Meridian Records for 19 years, and in that time I learned to read a person by the way they came through the revolving door. The confident ones pushed too hard and got stuck a half second, then covered it by walking fast. The nervous ones waited for the door to spit out whoever was ahead of them, then slipped in alone, like they didn't want to share the glass. The important ones didn't use the revolving door at all. They used the side entrance with the keycard and the little chime that never worked right. Nora Bell always came through the middle. Right down the center panel, 6 minutes early, a paper cup of gas station coffee in one hand and a canvas bag over her shoulder that had a broken strap she'd tied back together with a shoelace. She'd nod at me. Not a big smile, just enough to say she saw me, and that she counted me as a person worth seeing, which is more than half the building managed. I liked her. I want to say that plain, because a lot of what came after got twisted up by people who never bothered to learn what she was actually like. So here it is from someone who watched her walk past my desk twice a day for 4 years. Nora Bell was decent. She was tired in the particular way that only a certain kind of woman gets tired, down in the bones, patient about it, never asking anybody to notice. The Tuesday it all started, she came in late. That was the first strange thing. Nora was never late, but there she was at 8:41 and she wasn't holding coffee, she was holding a hand. The hand belonged to a small boy. He had a cowlick that stood straight up at the back of his head, and he was wearing a backpack shaped like a green dinosaur, and he was looking up at the ceiling of the lobby the way you'd look at a cathedral. 6 years old, maybe. He had her chin, same seriousness around the mouth. "Morning, Marion," she said, and I could hear it in her voice. She was hoping I wouldn't make it a thing. "Morning," I looked at the boy, "and who's the gentleman?" "This is Theo." She crouched a little, the bag sliding down her arm. "Theo, this is Miss Marion. She runs the whole building." "I don't run the whole building," I said. "I just know where everything is." Theo studied me. "Do you know where the bathroom is?" "Second door on your left, past the fern." He nodded like I'd passed a test. Nora straightened up. She lowered her voice, and there was a rawness under it she was working hard to keep down. "His school had a water main break. No daycare backup. My sister's in Ohio, and I've got the quarter-end reconciliation due at noon. I'm going to sit him in the corner of my cube with a tablet and headphones. He won't make a sound. I swear to you, Marion, he's really good. He'll be invisible." "You don't have to sell me," I said. "I'm not the one you have to worry about." Something crossed her face when I said that. She knew who she had to worry about. We both did. His name was Preston Vance, and he ran the 3rd floor. Now I've met a lot of Prestons. Not the name, the type. The type who gets a little authority late enough in life that it goes to his head like wine on an empty stomach. Preston was maybe 42, always in a suit that fit him a size too snug through the shoulders, and he had a way of standing in a doorway so you had to ask him to move. He kept a laminated card on his desk that listed the department's core values, and he'd read from it in meetings, out loud, like scripture. He wrote people up for coming back 4 minutes late from lunch. He once sent a company-wide email about the correct way to load the dishwasher in the break room. Subject line all capitals. He wasn't evil. I want to be fair. Evil would have been easier to explain. Preston was scared all the time, of the people above him, of the numbers on his dashboard, of being found out for something he couldn't have named. And a scared man with a laminated card is more dangerous than a cruel one, because he believes the card is on his side. Nora worked under him. She was one of his best, which he resented, because being good at a thing threatens a man who suspects he isn't. I watched her walk Theo toward the elevator. The boy stopped in front of the big lobby portrait, the one of the founders, black and white, 2 men in bad 70s collars, and he pointed up at it. "Who are they?" "They started the company," Nora said, "a long time ago." "Are they dead?" "One of them." "Which one?" She looked at the picture a second longer than she needed to. "Come on, baby, elevator." I didn't think much of the question then. I do now. Here's a thing about that portrait. The man on the left, the taller one with the cigarette he wasn't allowed to smoke in the picture but was clearly aching to, that was Harold Meridian, and he was the dead one. The other man, younger even in the old photo, hanging back a little like he wasn't sure he belonged in the frame, was Everett Locke. Except Everett Locke wasn't in that photo because he was a founder. He was in it because he'd started at Meridian at 19 in the mailroom, and by 26 he'd bought out Harold's widow when the company nearly folded, and by the time I met him, he owned the whole thing outright and about 6 others besides. You wouldn't have known it to look at him. That was the trick of the man. He drove a 10-year-old car. He ate lunch in the same cafeteria as the temps. He knew the names of the janitorial crew and asked about their kids, and he remembered the answers, which is rarer than knowing the names. Most of the third floor had never seen him in person. To them, he was a signature at the bottom of an email and a face on a wall. He came in that Tuesday through the side door, the one with the broken chime, at 9:15. I saw him because I see everyone. He had a folder under his arm and reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he looked like a man on his way to a meeting he'd rather skip. He stopped at my desk. He always stopped. "Marion, how's the hip?" "Still attached." "That's the goal." He tapped the counter twice, a habit of his. "Anything I need to know about?" I don't know why I said what I said next. I've turned it over 100 times. Maybe I already had a feeling. Maybe I just wanted an ally in the building for that little boy with the dinosaur backpack. "Nora Bell up in billing brought her son in today," I said. "School flooded, sweet kid, quiet as a mouse." Everett paused, just a beat. Something moved behind his eyes and then went still, the way water settles. "A boy," he said. 6 or so, named Theo." He looked at the founder's portrait across the lobby. He looked at it the way Nora had, a second too long. "Reconciliations due today," he said, half to himself. "Preston running that floor tight this quarter." "Preston runs every floor tight," I said. "Even the ones that aren't his." The corner of Everett's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "Thank you, Marion." And he went to the elevator, and the doors closed on him, and I went back to signing in a courier and didn't think about it for 2 hours. 2 hours was about how long Nora made it. I got the story later in pieces from Nora, from a woman named Callie who sat 2 cubes over, from Preston's own mouth when he was busy making himself the hero of it. Let me put it together the way it happened. Theo was good. That part everyone agrees on. He sat in the corner of Nora's cube on an overturned recycling bin she'd padded with her coat, headphones on, working his way through a tablet game about a fox who collects stars. He didn't run. He didn't yell. When he had to use the bathroom, he tugged Nora's sleeve and whispered, and Callie walked him down so Nora wouldn't lose her place in the spreadsheet. For a while it was almost sweet. Callie told me people kept finding excuses to walk past, to drop off a form, to borrow a stapler that didn't need borrowing, just to get a look at the kid on the recycling bin, small and serious, his tongue poking out of the corner of his mouth when the fox missed a star. A little bit of life in a room that ran on fluorescent light and other people's overdue medical bills. Then Theo got hungry. He didn't complain. He just went quiet in the way kids go quiet when their blood sugar drops, and he started swinging his feet, and one of his sneakers thunked against the metal side of the recycling bin. Once. Then again a small sound, rhythmic. Preston heard it from his office. Now you have to understand he'd already heard. Somebody had told him. In a building like that, a child is a piece of news that travels faster than a fire. Preston had spent the morning deciding what kind of man he was going to be about it, and the foot thumping made the decision for him. He came out of his office with the laminated card energy all over him. Callie said he stood at the mouth of Nora's cube with his arms crossed and looked down at Theo like the boy was a coffee stain on the carpet. "Is this a joke?" Nora stood up. She put herself between him and her son, which is an instinct so old it doesn't ask permission. Preston, I'm sorry. His school flooded. I didn't have any option. I've got the reconciliation done by noon like always. I promise you nobody's even. You brought a child into a workplace, handling protected health information. He's got headphones on. He can't see my screen. I turned it away. Do you know what our liability exposure is if that kid so much as glances at a patient record? Preston's voice was climbing. Callie said the whole floor had gone still, everybody's eyes suddenly very busy with their own monitors. Do you have any idea? We are audited. We are a HIPAA-covered entity. And you decided the rules are for other people. I didn't decide anything. I made a call at 6 this morning with no. You could have called out. I can't afford to call out. It came out of her flat and true, and the flatness of it was worse than shouting. You know I can't. That should have ended it. A decent man hears a sentence like that and remembers he's a person. But Preston had an audience now, and an audience is oxygen to a scared man. Callie said Theo had pulled his headphones down and was watching, and that's the part that stays with me. The boy watching a grown man tower over his mother, learning something about the world he was too young to have to learn. Pack up your things, Preston said. The floor went from quiet to a different kind of quiet. Nora didn't move for a second. What? You heard me. This is gross misconduct. I've been documenting the pattern for weeks. What pattern? The tardiness, the personal calls. I've been late once, today, because a pipe burst under an elementary school. Pack your things. I've thought a lot about the word pattern. There was no pattern. There was a spreadsheet in Preston's head where he kept a running total of every human moment that inconvenienced him, and he called it documentation, and it made him feel like a professional instead of what he was, which was a man about to fire a widow in front of her child to prove he could. Theo said in the small, clear voice of a 6-year-old, "Mommy, did you do something bad?" And Callie said that was the moment Nora's face changed. Not to anger, to something more terrible than anger. She reached down and pulled her son's headphones back up over his ears, gentle, careful, so he wouldn't hear the rest, and then she started putting her things into the canvas bag with the shoelace strap, and her hands were completely steady, and that steadiness was the loudest thing in the room. She didn't beg after that. That's the thing people got wrong about her later. She didn't cry and she didn't grovel. She packed her coat and her photo of Theo and the little cactus she kept by her monitor, and she took her son's hand, and she walked toward the elevator with her chin up like her whole life didn't just come apart. Preston, needing the last word the way his kind always does, called after her. "This is on you, Nora. You did this to yourself." She stopped, she turned around, and in front of the whole silent floor she said, calm as still water, "His name is Theo. He's the reason I've never once let you down before today. You'll remember that longer than you think." Then the elevator took them down to me. I saw the doors open. I saw her face held together with everything she had. I saw Theo's face, confused, tilted up at his mother, the dinosaur backpack sagging off one shoulder. She stopped at my desk. She always stopped, same as Everett, and I've thought about that too. The decent ones and the powerful ones both know to stop at the desk, and it's the same instinct wearing two different coats. "Marion," she said, and her voice only broke on the second syllable of my name. "I'm going to need you to sign me out for the last time." "Nora." "It's okay. It's okay." Theo tugged her hand. "Are we going home? I'm hungry." "Yeah, baby, we're going home. I'll make you eggs." She signed the visitor log, not the employee log, because he'd already had her badge deactivated that fast. He'd called down before she even reached the elevator. That's how I knew it was planned and not passion. And she slid the pen back into its little cup, and she looked at me one more time. "Thank you for always being kind to us," she said. And they went out through the revolving door, right down the center panel. The two of them squeezed into one segment of glass, and I watched them cross the parking lot into a gray morning, and I want to tell you I did something. I want to tell you I stood up and made a scene. I didn't. I sat there with my hand over my mouth like a coward and let it happen, same as everyone else in that building. But somebody had been watching from the mezzanine. I didn't know it yet. I found out later that Everett Locke had come down from his meeting to get a coffee from the lobby cart, and he'd stopped on the mezzanine landing when he heard raised voices float up the atrium, and he'd stood there in the shadow of a ficus tree, unseen, and watched the entire thing. Watched Preston. Watched Nora walk out with her chin up. Watched a small boy in a dinosaur backpack ask his mother if she'd done something bad. I found out because when I finally lowered my hand from my mouth and looked up, Everett was standing at the mezzanine rail, both hands gripping it, looking down at the revolving door still turning from where they'd pushed through it. He wasn't looking like a CEO. He was looking like a man who'd seen a ghost, or worse, like a man who'd seen himself. He came down the stairs slow. He didn't stop at my desk. That was the only time in 19 years Everett Locke walked past my desk without a word, and it told me more than anything he could have said. He went out the revolving door and stood in the parking lot in the gray, watching an old Honda with a taped-up tail light pull out into traffic. Then he came back in, and he stopped at my desk after all, and his voice was very quiet. "Marion. What's her address?" "Sir, I can't." I know you can't." He rubbed his face with one hand. "The boy, Theo, you said Theo." "Yes." He nodded slowly like the name confirmed something. "My mother was a Nora," he said, which made no sense to me then. Not the name, the situation. "My mother was a Nora." And he went up to his office and shut the door. And Callie told me later that the first thing he did was pull the personnel file. And the second thing he did was cancel every meeting on his calendar for the next day. And the third thing, the thing nobody could explain, the thing that turned into the story the whole company would be whispering by end of week. The next morning, before the sun was properly up, Everett Locke was sitting in his 10-year-old car outside a little rented duplex on the east side of town, waiting for the lights to come on in Nora Bell's kitchen. Nora didn't sleep that night. I know because she told me, months later, when the whole thing had settled, and we could finally talk about it like people instead of characters in something. She said she'd made Theo his eggs like she promised, and she'd let him stay up past his bedtime watching cartoons because she couldn't bear to enforce a single rule that day. And after he'd fallen asleep against her arm on the couch, she'd carried him to bed and then sat at the kitchen table with the laptop and started counting. That's what you do when the fear comes. You count. Rent was 11 days out. The car payment was the 9th. There was 400 and change in checking and a savings account that had been an idea more than an account for 2 years running. She'd been at Meridian long enough to have decent insurance and not long enough in this position to have a cushion, because the position had come with a title bump and no raise, which is a trick they run on people they know won't leave. She made a list of who she could call. It was a short list. Her sister in Ohio, who had her own 2 kids and a husband between jobs, a former manager who'd moved to Denver, a temp agency she'd used before Meridian, back when Theo was a baby and she was piecing shifts together like a quilt. She got the resume open around 1 in the morning. She got as far as updating the end date on the Meridian line. She typed it, that little box, the month and the year, and she said seeing it there in black and white was the first time the whole day felt real. She closed the laptop after that. She couldn't do the rest. She went and stood in Theo's doorway and watched him sleep with his mouth open and one foot hanging off the mattress, and she made herself a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, which is the only kind of promise that counts. The knock came at 6:40 in the morning. She thought it was the landlord. Mr. Petrakis came around early sometimes about the gutters. She was already up, already dressed in yesterday's clothes because she hadn't been able to make herself change, and she opened the door with the chain still on and looked out through the gap. There was a man on her step she'd seen exactly twice in 4 years, both times from across a room, and it took her a full 3 seconds to place him without the context of the building around him. "Ms. Bell," he said, "I'm sorry, I know how this looks." "Mr. Locke." "Everett's fine." "It's not fine," she said, and then heard herself and pressed her lips together. She was too tired to be careful and too scared to be rude, and the two things were fighting. He had 2 coffees in a cardboard tray and a paper bag that had a grease spot coming through one corner, and he was standing well back from the door, off the step entirely, down on the little concrete path, giving her all the space the geometry allowed. That registered with her even through the fog. A man who understood that showing up at a woman's home at dawn was a thing you had to do carefully or not at all. "I'm not here to, I don't have a speech," he said. "I watched what happened yesterday, from the mezzanine, all of it. And I've been up most of the night and I couldn't come to the office and sit in that building and pretend I didn't see it. So I came here instead, which might be worse, and if it is, you tell me and I'll go." Nora didn't take the chain off. "Why?" "Because it was wrong," he said. "Because Preston had you fired to feel like a big man in front of a floor of people, and it was wrong, and I run the company so it's mine to fix. And because," he stopped. She said his face did a thing she didn't have a word for yet. "Because I know that boy, not him. But I was that boy, standing next to a mother getting talked to like that. I know exactly where he's standing right now." From somewhere behind her, a small voice, "Mommy, who is it?" Theo came padding up in dinosaur pajamas that matched the backpack, rubbing one eye, and he looked up at the man on the path, and the man looked down at him, and something in Everett Locke's face came apart very quietly and put itself back together. "Hi," Everett said. "You must be Theo." "That's my name." He looked at the coffee tray, then at the bag. "Is that food?" "Theo," Nora said. "It's donuts," Everett said. "I didn't know what he liked, so I got the box with all of them. If that's okay with your mom." And Nora, who had spent the night counting, who had every reason on earth to shut the door, looked at this strange rich man standing off her step with a grease-spotted bag, looked at her son already leaning into the doorframe with naked donut hope on his face, and did the arithmetic of a mother, which is different from every other arithmetic. She took the chain off. They sat at her kitchen table, the 3 of them, and this is the part I had to piece together carefully, because it's the part that matters most, and Nora only told it to me once. She said the strangest thing was how ordinary he was up close. In the building, he was a rumor. At her table, he was a middle-aged man who blew on his coffee and let Theo interrogate him about whether he had a dog. He did. A bad one. And whether the dog knew tricks. It did not. And whether he'd ever met a real dinosaur. He said only in meetings. And Theo thought that was the funniest thing anybody had ever said. He let the kid warm up before he said anything real. That was deliberate. Nora saw it and respected it. He was giving Theo a good morning before he had to talk about the bad one. When Theo took his second donut to the living room to watch cartoons, Everett folded his hands on the table and got to it. "I looked at your file last night," he said. 4 years, every review above expectations. You built the reconciliation process the whole floor uses now. Your name's on the internal doc. Did you know that? Preston stripped it off the version he circulates, but it's in the original. You wrote it." "I didn't know he took my name off." "He takes a lot of names off things." Everett turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. "You want to know what I actually came to say? I'll say it. Your job is yours. It was never legitimately gone. A floor manager doesn't have the authority to terminate the way he did. He skipped 4 steps and half of HR, and if you want it, you walk back in whenever you're ready, and there's no gap, no story. The badge works. The pay runs like nothing happened. That's the easy part. I could have said that in an email." Nora waited. She was good at waiting. It was one of the things that made her good at her job, and it was a thing she'd learned young, and she was about to learn where he'd learned it too. "The hard part is I don't want you to just take it and let me feel better," Everett said, "because that's what this is at risk of being. A rich man buys off his own bad feeling by fixing one person's morning. And you go back to that floor and Preston's still standing there having learned nothing, and in 3 months he does it to somebody who doesn't have a Marion at the front desk mentioning her name to the right person at the right time. You know it was luck, right? That I heard. It was luck. That's what's eating me. How many times has it happened when I wasn't standing under a ficus tree?" Nora didn't say anything. So he looked at her. "I need to know what actually happened up there. Not the version in the incident report Preston filed at 4 p.m. yesterday, which I've read and which is a work of fiction. The real one. And I need to know if you'll help me look at the whole floor because I don't think it's just you. I think you're the one who got caught because your kid thumped a recycling bin. I think there's a pattern and I think it's his, not yours." There was that word again, pattern, but in his mouth it pointed the other direction. Nora set down her coffee. She looked toward the living room where Theo was laughing at something, safe, warm, donut in hand, and she made a second decision that morning that changed the shape of everything. "You want the real one," she said. "Okay. But you're not going to like where it goes, because it's not just Preston being cruel. Preston's cruel, sure. But cruel men don't usually keep spreadsheets. The spreadsheets are for something. I've been trying to figure out what for about 6 months, and I stopped digging because I've got a kid and a rent check, and I couldn't afford what I was starting to find." Everett went very still. "What were you starting to find, Ms. Bell?" "Nora," she almost smiled. "If we're doing this, it's Nora." "What were you starting to find, Nora?" She got up. She went to the hall closet. She came back with a shoebox, an actual shoebox, the kind of thing that would have looked ridiculous in that gleaming building, and she set it on the table between them and took off the lid. Inside were printouts. Bank statement-looking things, vendor invoices, a little USB drive in a sandwich bag, and a spiral notebook with dates going back the better part of a year, filled in her small, careful hand. "The reconciliation I do every quarter," she said. "The numbers close, they always close. That's the point of a reconciliation, right? It's supposed to close. But about a year ago I noticed they closed too clean. There's this one vendor, a billing software contractor, out of a P.O. box in a state we don't operate in, and the numbers to them close perfectly, to the penny, every quarter, and nothing real closes perfectly to the penny every quarter. Real numbers are messy. These are the only clean thing on the whole floor." She tapped the notebook. "So I started keeping my own copy, just to understand it, and the more I looked, the more it stopped looking like a mistake. And then about 6 months ago Preston started documenting me, right around when I asked billing to pull the original contract for that vendor, right around then. And I told myself that was a coincidence because the other thing it could be was too big and I've got a 6-year-old and no cushion." She looked at him steadily. "You asked why he really fired me. The recycling bin was the excuse. But he's been looking for a reason since the day I asked a question I wasn't supposed to ask." Everett Locke looked at the shoebox on the table for a long time. Then he did something Nora said she'll never forget. He didn't grab the box. He didn't get excited. He pushed his coffee aside and he pulled the notebook toward himself, and he opened it to the first page, and he said very quietly, the way you'd talk in a hospital, "Tell me about the clean number. Start at the beginning. I've got all day. I canceled everything." And that's when Nora understood he actually meant it, that he wasn't there to buy off a bad feeling. He was there to help her carry something she'd been carrying alone in a shoebox in a hall closet, afraid of it, for half a year. Now I have to back up and tell you about Everett's mother, because he told Nora about her that same morning, and Nora told me, and without it none of the rest makes sense. His mother's name was Ruth. She cleaned offices at night, a building not so different from the one Everett would eventually own, which is the kind of circle life draws when it's feeling cruel or maybe just symmetrical. Everett was small, Theo's age or a little older, and there were nights she couldn't get a sitter, so she'd bring him along and set him up in an empty conference room with a coloring book while she ran the vacuum down the halls. One night the building manager found him there, a boy alone in a conference room at 10 at night. And the man, Everett, said he could still see his face, 40 years on, the specific way a certain kind of man's face looks when he's found a rule to enforce. The man walked Ruth off the property in front of the rest of the night crew and told her she was done, that she'd violated the terms, that a cleaning contract wasn't a daycare. Said it loud. Said it so the others would hear and learn. And little Everett stood next to his mother holding his coloring book and asked her, in a small, clear voice, "Mama, did you do something bad?" Same words, 40 years apart. Same words out of the same kind of small mouth. And that's what had put Everett Locke on his feet on the mezzanine and kept him up all night and driven him across town at dawn with a box of donuts he didn't know how to give away. "My mother didn't have a Marion," he told Nora. "Nobody upstairs heard. Nobody came the next morning. She took 2 buses to another building the next week and started over at the bottom. And she did that 3 more times in my childhood, and every time it was a man with a rule who'd found a reason. And I promised myself when I was about 9 years old that if I ever got to be the man in the building, the one at the top, the one they're all scared of, I would be a different one. And then I got busy, Nora. I got rich and I got busy, and I built a company with 1,100 people in it, and I stopped standing under the ficus tree long enough to hear the ones getting walked out. I became a signature at the bottom of an email. I became the wall photo." He rubbed his eyes. "Yesterday I heard your boy say my words, and I realized I'd spent 40 years becoming the guy at the top so I wouldn't become the guy who walked my mother out. And I never once checked whether the guys walking people out were doing it on my floors, with my name on the building, while I ate lunch 2 levels down feeling like a good man because I remembered the janitor's kids' names." Nora said the kitchen was very quiet after that. Theo's cartoon murmured from the other room. "So no," Everett said. "This isn't charity and it isn't guilt, though God knows there's guilt in it. I need your shoebox because if that clean number is what I think it is, then Preston isn't a cruel middle manager who fired a good woman. He's a cruel middle manager who fired a good woman because she found something, and that means somebody above him is running something through my company, and I have been too busy being admired to notice." He closed the notebook. He looked at her. "I'm asking you to come back, not to your old job. I want you sitting next to me while we figure out what that P.O. box is. Full pay and then some, and it's dangerous, and I'll understand completely if you say no, because you've got him." He tipped his head toward the living room. "And he only gets one mother. And I of all people know what it costs when the mother is the one who takes the risk." Nora looked at her son through the doorway. He'd fallen asleep sitting up, donut still in his fist, cartoons flashing across his small, slack face. "When do we start?" she said. Nora came back to the building on a Thursday, and the whole floor turned to look. That's a thing that happens in an office. Bad news travels one direction and then it has to travel back the other, and nobody knows the etiquette. She'd been walked out on Tuesday to the sound of Preston's voice, and here she was Thursday morning coming through the revolving door, center panel, of course, with her badge working and her chin level, and 30 people who'd watched her go didn't know whether to smile or hide. She stopped at my desk first. "Morning, Marion." "Nora," I could have cried. I didn't because she wouldn't have wanted the fuss, but I put my hand over hers on the counter for a second, which for me is the same as crying. "You're back." "I'm back." Then lower just for me. "Something's different, though. Don't be surprised by anything today. And whatever Preston says about me, don't believe the shape of it, okay?" I never believe the shape of anything Preston says. That got the first real smile out of her I'd seen since the Tuesday. She went to the elevator. Here's what she didn't tell me because she couldn't yet. She wasn't going up to the billing floor. Her badge had been reprogrammed overnight. It now opened a door on the 5th floor that it had never opened before, a small conference room next to Everett's office that he'd had cleared out, table, 2 laptops, a whiteboard, and a coffee machine that actually worked. On the door someone had taped a printed sign that said Internal Audit, Project Ruth. He'd named it after his mother. He didn't tell Nora that at first. She figured it out about a week in, saw the name on a folder and asked, and he just said yeah and changed the subject and she let him. But she went up to the billing floor first anyway, on purpose, because Everett had asked her one thing before they started. "Walk through your old floor," he'd said. "Let him see you. Don't say anything, don't gloat, just be visible. I want to watch what he does." A man protecting a crime and a man protecting his ego behave differently, and I want to know which one we've got before we start pulling threads. So Nora walked the length of the billing floor at 8:55 in the morning, coat over her arm, calm as Sunday, and she watched Preston see her. Callie described it to me later and I've never forgotten it. She said Preston came out of his office with a coffee, saw Nora standing by her old cube talking to Callie about nothing, the weather, Theo's school reopening, and he stopped so hard the coffee jumped the lip of the cup and burned his hand and he didn't even seem to feel it. His face went through about 4 things. Surprise, then a flash of pure fury, then something scrambling and calculating. And then last, the thing that told the whole story. Fear. Not the fear of a man whose authority's been undercut. Callie said she'd seen that kind before, the wounded boss look. This was different. This was the fear of a man doing math very fast. She's back. Who brought her back? What do they know? What does it mean that they know it? He looked at Nora and you could see him trying to figure out how much the ground had moved. He didn't come over. That was the tell. A man protecting his ego would have come over, would have needed to reassert himself, made some remark, planted a flag. Preston went back into his office and shut the door and Callie said, immediately picked up his phone, not the desk phone, his personal cell, and he turned his chair to face the window while he talked. Nora saw all of it. She finished her conversation with Callie, unhurried, said her goodbyes, and went up to the 5th floor to a man waiting with 2 laptops and a whiteboard, and she said. He made a call, personal phone, turned his back to the room. Everett nodded slowly. So it's not ego. It's not ego. Then somebody just got told you're back. He capped and uncapped a marker, which means we have maybe a week before whatever that clean number touches starts getting cleaned up itself. Let's move. The clean number. I'm going to try to explain it the way Nora eventually explained it to me, because you don't need an accounting degree to feel why it mattered. You just need to understand one honest thing about the world. Real numbers are messy. If you and I split a dinner check, it never comes out even. There's tax, there's the tip that's a weird percentage, there's the thing one of us didn't order. Multiply that across a company that processes medical billing for a few hundred clinics, millions of transactions, thousands of little adjustments and write-offs and corrections, and the numbers at the end of a quarter are a landscape of mess. That mess is normal. That mess is health. An auditor who sees mess relaxes. But there was one vendor line that didn't have any mess. The vendor was called Halcyon Billing Solutions LLC. On paper it provided claims processing software licensing and maintenance. Meridian paid Halcyon a fee every quarter. And that fee, quarter after quarter, reconciled to 0 variance. Not close, not with intolerance, but exactly to the cent, like a number someone had decided on rather than a number that had happened. Nora's instinct, the instinct of a person who'd built the floor's whole reconciliation process, was that you cannot get that. Not honestly. The only way a number closes that perfectly is if someone on both ends already knows what it's supposed to be and makes it be that. Which means the vendor and the customer are, in some sense, the same hand. That was the thread, Halcyon. They started pulling it that first Thursday, and here's the first thing they found, and it's small, and it's the kind of small thing that unravels everything. Halcyon Billing Solutions LLC listed a business address that was a P.O. box in a state where Meridian had no clinics, no clients, no operations. Fine, lots of LLCs use registered agent P.O. boxes. But the maintenance invoices, the actual PDFs Halcyon sent every quarter for its software support, had a metadata trail. Nora knew to look because Nora is the kind of person who looks. And the PDFs had been created, not sent, created, authored on a machine whose user account, buried in the document properties, read a name. Not Preston's. The account name was M. Callahan. Nora sat back from the laptop. "Do we have a Callahan?" Everett said. "We have one Callahan." Her voice had gone careful. "Marcus Callahan. He's not on the billing floor. He's not in my chain at all." She looked up. "He's in procurement. He's the one who approves new vendors. He's the gate. Nothing becomes a paid Meridian vendor without Callahan's signature on the onboarding." Everett was quiet a moment. So the man who invents the fake vendor is also the man who approves the fake vendor. If it's fake. Nora. I know it's fake. She rubbed her forehead. I want to say it's fake carefully, because once we say it out loud we can't unsay it. And Marcus Callahan has been here longer than I have, and he coaches Little League, and I've met his wife at the holiday thing. That's the part people forget about real corruption. It doesn't have a villain face. It has a Little League coach's face. It has a face you've handed a paper plate to at the holiday party. That's what makes it work. That's what makes good people not look, or look and then stop looking. The way Nora had stopped 6 months ago. Not because she was afraid of a monster, but because she was afraid of what it would do to a man she thought of as a decent guy, and to that man's wife, and to whatever kids were on that Little League team. Everett understood that. He said something Nora repeated to me that I've held on to. "The reason this works," he said, "is that it's built out of everybody's decency. Callahan counts on you not wanting to hurt his family. Preston counts on people not wanting to make a scene. I counted for years on the whole thing running quiet so I never had to know. Every good instinct we've got, they've turned into a wall around the thing, which means the only way through is to be willing to do a hard thing to people who have faces we like. And I'm asking you to do it with me. So if you want out, this is the door. It gets worse from here, not better." Nora thought about Theo. She'd been thinking about Theo the whole time. A mother never stops running that particular background process. But she thought about him differently now than she had at 1 in the morning with the resume open. Then he'd been the reason to be careful. Now he was starting to be the reason not to be. "He asked me if I did something bad," she said. "In front of the whole floor. My kid asked me that." She closed the laptop halfway. "I'm not doing this because I'm brave, Everett. I want to be honest about that with you because you've been honest with me. I'm doing it because I never want to explain to my son why I found something like this and put it back in a shoebox because a man I liked coached Little League. That's not a lesson I can teach him. So no, I'm not taking the door." "Where's Callahan's onboarding file?" Everett looked at her for a second, and then he did the thing he'd do 100 more times over the weeks that followed, the thing that told you what kind of man he actually was under the wall photo and the 10-year-old car. He didn't praise her. He didn't make it a speech. He just got up and got the file and got to work beside her, because the highest respect you can pay a person's courage is to take it seriously enough to match it. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, Preston Vance was starting to come apart, and it's worth watching him do it, because he's the kind of man this whole thing is really a warning about. He'd made his phone call. We know now who it was to Callahan, because of course it was. The two of them were the near end and the far end of the same rope. And Callahan had told him to stay calm, that Nora being back meant nothing, that HR sometimes reversed hasty terminations, that Preston should for God's sake not do anything. Which is exactly the wrong thing to say to a scared man. Because Preston couldn't leave it alone. That was never in him. He spent Thursday afternoon auditing, his word, Nora's old files, ostensibly to build his case that her termination had been justified, actually to find out what she knew. He pulled the reconciliation archives. He pulled the vendor logs. And in doing so, he left a trail of his own, because the file system logged every document he opened, and later that would matter enormously. But in the moment, it just made him more frantic, because the more he looked at what Nora had been looking at, the more he understood what she must have seen. He came out of his office around 4. Callie said he looked gray. He walked the floor. He stopped at Nora's old cube, empty now, her cactus and her photo of Theo gone home in the canvas bag Tuesday. He stood there a while. Callie, 2 cubes over, pretended to type. "Where'd they put her?" he said. "Not to anyone, to the cube." Callie, because she's braver than me, said, "I heard 5th floor." Preston turned, "5th floor." "That's what I heard." The 5th floor was Everett's floor. There was no billing on the 5th floor. There was no reason on God's earth for a billing analyst to be reassigned to the 5th floor unless the reassignment had nothing to do with billing. Callie said she watched the understanding arrive on his face like weather. 5th floor meant Everett. Everett meant the top. The top meant this was no longer a thing Preston could manage with a well-worded incident report and a friendly voice on his personal cell. The top meant the wall photo had come down off the wall and was walking around the building asking questions. And Preston Vance did what scared men at the edge of exposure always do, the thing that turns a survivable problem into an unsurvivable one. He decided to get ahead of it. He went back to his office. He opened a new email. And he began, very carefully, to build a story in which he'd been the one who noticed irregularities in Nora Bell's reconciliations, in which his documentation of her had been the diligent early warnings of a manager protecting the company, in which, if anything came out about Halcyon, it would be Nora's mess and his catch. He was going to frame her, not out of a plan, out of panic. He was going to take the true thing that Nora had found the fraud and invert it, make her the source instead of the discoverer, and make himself the hero who'd been raising red flags about her all along. That's what the pattern documentation had really been for, though even Preston might not have known it until that afternoon. He'd been building, without quite admitting it to himself, exactly the paper trail you'd need to blame the person who found the crime for the crime itself. He hit send on the first email to HR at 4:52 p.m. on Thursday. He had no idea that 2 floors up, in a room with his name already in a metadata field she hadn't found yet, Nora Bell was about to open the one document that connected Marcus Callahan to Halcyon to a bank account, and that the timestamp on Preston's frantic little email would end up being one of the neatest pieces of evidence in the whole case. Because you don't rush to blame someone for a thing you just found out about at 4 o'clock unless you already knew the thing was there. He was, in trying to save himself, signing his own name to it. The bank account behind Halcyon lived in the name of a second shell, Cormorant Holdings, and it took them until the following Tuesday to find the seam that connected the two, because whoever built it was patient, and it was built to look boring, and boring is the best camouflage there is. Nora found it the way she found everything, by refusing to accept a number that was too neat. Halcyon billed Meridian. Halcyon paid a subcontractor, Cormorant, almost the identical amount, minus a small management fee, and the fee was the mistake. It was 15% flat every quarter, and 15% flat is what a man invents when he wants his cut to feel like a real business expense. Real subcontractor margins wobble. This one never did. Cormorant's account, when Everett's outside counsel finally subpoenaed it, had exactly 2 signatories. Marcus Callahan, and a name none of them expected, Diane Callahan, his wife, the one Nora had handed a paper plate to at the holiday party. That's the moment Nora almost stopped again. She told me about it. She sat in Project Ruth and looked at Diane Callahan's signature and thought about the Little League team and the house that 15% had probably paid a chunk of, and she felt the old fear come back, not fear for herself now, fear of the damage. The way a decent person flinches from being the cause of someone else's ruin, even when the someone earned it. Everett watched her go quiet and knew exactly what it was. "You're not doing it to them," he said. "They did it to themselves over years on purpose, with a P.O. box and a shell company and a 15% fee they picked to look normal. You're just the one who wouldn't look away. There's a difference, Nora, and if you let them blur it, they win even from prison." She went home that night and did something she'd never done. She told Theo a version of it, a kid's version, no names, no numbers. She said, "There's a man at Mommy's work who took something that wasn't his, and it would have been easier for me to pretend I didn't see. And I'm not going to pretend." And Theo, 6 years old, chewing a fish stick, considered this with the whole seriousness of his small face and said, "Good. Because taking stuff is bad even if you're a grown-up." And Nora said that was the entire ethics of the thing, out of the mouth of a boy who still needed help with buttons, and she never felt uncertain again. Then the danger got real. On Wednesday, files started disappearing. Not dramatically, a document here, a log entry there, the quiet housekeeping of someone who'd been warned. The original Halcyon onboarding packet vanished from procurement's archive. A whole quarter of vendor emails went missing. Callahan had gotten his cue from Preston, we now know, whose panic emails had told Callahan the exact shape of what was coming, and he was sanitizing. But here's the thing about people who clean up in a panic. They clean the copy they know about. They didn't know about Nora's shoebox. 6 months of her small, careful handwriting, the USB in the sandwich bag, printouts made on her home printer at a kitchen table, entirely outside the company's systems, untouchable by anyone deleting things at the office. While Callahan erased the official record, Nora Bell had a complete shadow copy in a shoebox from a hall closet, timestamped by the boring reliability of a woman who wrote things down because she didn't trust that anyone else would. And they didn't know about Preston's emails. Because Preston, trying to save himself, had sent a flurry of messages to HR building his Frame Nora story. And those messages sat on Meridian's own servers, and the very first one was timestamped 4:52 p.m. the Thursday she came back. Everett's counsel laid it out cold. You don't rush to accuse someone of a fraud at 4:52 on the day you learn she's back, unless at 4:51 you already knew the fraud was there to be pinned on somebody. Preston's alibi was a confession wearing a lanyard. In trying to name the discoverer as the criminal, he'd time-stamped his own guilty knowledge. They moved on a Friday. Everett did it quietly, which was worse for the guilty than any scene. No security guard perp walk, no floor-wide spectacle. Preston had liked spectacle, and Everett denied him even that. 2 people from outside counsel and 1 from HR went to procurement first. Callahan was gone within the hour, escorted to a conference room, then to a car, then to a set of problems that would take the FBI's white-collar unit the better part of 2 years to fully unwrap. Cormorant Halcyon, the 15%, all of it. Then they came for Preston. I saw that part because they brought him down through the lobby and I was at my desk, and I will admit, God forgive me, that I did not put my hand over my mouth this time. This time I watched. He came out of the elevator between 2 quiet people in good suits, and he was talking, still talking, because his kind never stops talking. Something about his record, his years, his diligence, his documentation. And he saw me, and for 1 second the old Preston surfaced, the doorway blocker, the laminated card reader, and he opened his mouth to say something to me, some last assertion of a rank he no longer had. And I looked at him the way he'd looked at that little boy on the recycling bin, like a coffee stain on the carpet, and I said nothing, which was the most eloquent thing I've ever not said. He went out through the revolving door, not the center panel. He got stuck a half-second and had to shove, the way the scared ones always do, and then he was gone into a gray afternoon, and the door turned a few times behind him and settled, and the lobby was very quiet, and up on the mezzanine in the shadow of that same ficus tree, Everett Locke stood watching, both hands on the rail, and this time his face wasn't a man who'd seen a ghost. It was a man who'd finally, 40 years late, got to be the one who came upstairs when it mattered. I want to tell you the ending the way it actually ended, because the shape of it surprised even me. Nora didn't get Preston's job. Everybody assumed she would. The tidy story, the promotion, the villain's chair handed to the hero. Everett offered it. She turned it down. "I don't want his floor," she told him. "I want a different one." What she wanted, it turned out, was the thing Everett had been circling all along without a name for it. She wanted to build the room that would have saved his mother. An internal function. She and Everett argued for a week about what to call it, and landed on nothing fancier than the desk you can walk up to, a place inside the company where a person being quietly walked out, or quietly leaned on, or quietly told the rules were only for them, could get a real human being to actually look before it was too late. Not HR. HR had sat on Preston's frame emails for a week without blinking. Something else. Something with teeth and a conscience. Everett funded it and got out of its way. Nora ran it. And the first thing she did, I found this out because she asked my permission first, which is the kind of thing she does, was hang a small photograph on the wall of that new room. Not a founder's portrait. A photocopy of an old snapshot Everett had given her. A woman in a cleaner's smock, tired around the eyes, patient in the bones, with a little boy beside her holding a coloring book. Ruth. The room got named for her officially in the end. Everett tried to stop it, embarrassed, and Nora overruled her own boss, which she'd earned the right to do. Project Ruth stopped being a temporary sign taped to a conference room door, and became a permanent thing with a real budget, and that tired, patient woman watching over it, so that no more small boys would have to stand next to their mothers and ask the question. Because that was the whole thing in the end, that question. Did you do something bad? A boy asked it in a cleaning company 40 years ago and nobody came. A boy asked it on a billing floor on a Tuesday, and this time, somebody was standing under a ficus tree, and somebody at a front desk had mentioned a name, and the whole enormous machine of a wrong finally met the small, stubborn fact of a woman who wrote things down and wouldn't look away. Theo's fine, in case you're wondering. He's older now. He came to the office once, years after, tall enough that the dinosaur backpack would have looked ridiculous, and Everett walked him past the founder's portrait in the lobby and Theo stopped in front of it, same as he had as a little boy, and pointed. "Who are they?" "They started the company," Everett said, "a long time ago." Then Everett walked him to the 5th floor, to the room with the photo of the tired woman, and he said, "But she's the reason it's worth working at." Theo looked at the picture a long time, longer than he needed to. He gets that from his mother. Me, I still work the front desk. I could have retired, I stayed, because I figured out late in life what that desk actually is. It's not where you sign people in. It's the one place in the whole building where everybody, the scared and the powerful and the tired and the cruel, has to slow down and pass a human being who's paying attention. And it turns out that's not a small job. It turns out a person paying attention at the right moment is sometimes the only thing standing between a wrong and the little boy who has to watch it happen. So I stay, and I watch the door, and I read people by the way they come through the glass. And when the tired ones come in down the center panel with a kid's hand in theirs and a bag held together with a shoelace, I make very sure I say good morning, because you never know which morning is the one that turns. Nora taught me that, or maybe her boy did. His name is Theo, he's the raisin.